So in this video, I'm not going to give you some framework to memorize. I'm going to walk you through what the actual work looks like step by step. I'm going to walk you through what I do first, what decisions I make along the way, and how one step leads to the next. If you've tried to understand the UX research process before, then you've probably seen the clean diagrams that shows the step-by-step process. Step 1, objective. Step 2, hypothesis. Step 3, maybe methods. And on paper, everything looks very clean. But then you suddenly get to the point of doing the actual UX research work and everything feels chaotic, everything feels messy. You're just not sure where to start. The people you're working with maybe give you vague problems and everybody wants answers from you. You are the researcher anyway, and no one just seems to agree on the question. That disconnect is what confuses a lot of people. You know, most textbook explanations explain the process as a checklist, check, check, check. But that's not how it feels when you're doing the actual work. In practice, UX research is actually a lot of conversations, a whole lot of conversations. Conversations with the product teams, with designers, with engineers, and then eventually with the users. And those conversations don't usually start with clarity. They almost never do. They start with confusion. So in this video, I'm not going to give you some framework to memorize. I'm going to walk you through what the actual work looks like step by step. I'm going to walk you through what I do first, what decisions I make along the way, and how one step leads to the next. So if you are new to UX research, or you're transitioning into it, or maybe you're just curious about how it works in real life, this one is for you. Make sure you don't skip any part of this video. Let's get right into it. Every UX research process I've worked on starts the same way. Someone comes and says something like, oh, our users are struggling. And that sounds important. Why should our users be struggling? But even as important as that sounds, that's incredibly vague. Struggling how? Struggling doing what? Struggling where? Or maybe even compared to what? What should it be ideally? And trust me, this is where a lot of new researchers start to panic, because suddenly you're the researcher, but no one has actually told you what they want to understand. All you've heard, for instance, is our users are struggling. And the most common mistake here is you jumping straight into methods. You hear people say things like, I guess we should run user interviews, maybe usability testing, or should we send out surveys? But let me be honest with you, research doesn't start with methods. Research starts with slowing things down. When I hear things like users are struggling, I don't straight away think, oh, what method should I use? What I think is, okay, what don't we understand yet? Because the sentence, our users are struggling, is not a research problem. It's a symptom. And my job as a UX researcher is to figure out what's underneath it. And that leads directly into the next step, talking to the stakeholders, talking to the actual stakeholders. Before I ever talk to users at all, I talk to stakeholders, the product managers, designers, engineers, sometimes leadership. These conversations are usually less formal. They are not interviews, they are more of working sessions. We'll usually talk things through with me trying to get the actual context of the problem. And to do that, I'll usually ask questions like, what decisions are we trying to make right now? For instance, are we trying to decide whether to move forward with a feature, or whether to redesign something, or maybe even decide if the problem we are solving is even the right one in the first place? What are we trying to learn with this study? What feels risky about this feature or this tool or this system or whatever it is we are trying to learn something about? What do we think users are doing, even if we are not confident yet if it's true? What makes this feel urgent? And what I'm trying to do at this point is to listen for tension. And by that I mean I'm trying to pay attention to where people sound unsure, where they are guessing, or where the team doesn't fully agree on what is happening. Because those are usually the points or the places where we don't fully understand the users yet. At this point, I'm usually working with the stakeholders to map things out, using tools like Mural just to capture questions, assumptions, and where people just generally feel unsure. Because beneath those vague statements, there's usually anxiety. The fear of building the wrong thing, the fear of wasting time, the fear of shipping something that doesn't work. And so your role here as a UX researcher is not to sound smart, is to translate that anxiety into something that we can actually investigate. Not that these conversations might not be one-off conversations, and you might also need to have conversations with multiple stakeholders depending on how many touch points what you're studying has. And so when those conversations with the stakeholders happen, something important changes. The chaos that you felt at the beginning, it starts to narrow. At this point, then we are ready to find the real question or questions. At this point, I've still not opened the research document. What I do is I pause and I ask myself some questions. I ask myself, what decisions would this research inform? Who exactly is confused right now? What don't we understand about the user's behavior? If I can't answer those questions, then the research won't matter. No matter how well executed it turns out to be, it wouldn't matter if I cannot answer those questions. This is the point where the project moves from just being busy to actually being useful. Because it's very important to know that research is not just about collecting data. Some people forget about that and just think that research is just them collecting data. Please note that research is not just about collecting data. It's about informing decisions. It's about reducing uncertainty for some set of people or for some people who need to make a decision or who have to make decisions. Speaking with the stakeholders also help you to align on the goals of the research, the scope, the research questions. That way you are carrying everybody along and there's a sense of shared ownership of the research. So when you bring back the results, it's not like an FYI. Everybody feels like a part of the research. That's one way to ensure that your research lands, that is useful, and it doesn't just get ignored by the stakeholders that really matter. So once we are clear on the decisions they are trying to make, then the next step becomes easier. Turning that uncertainty into research questions. This is where things finally get concrete. So instead of saying something like, let's run usability testing, I start by writing the questions the research needs to answer. So I write the actual research questions. An example will be something like, how do first-timers interpret this experience? What causes people to abandon this task halfway through? Where do experienced users hesitate even though they know the system? You see, these research questions, they become the backbone of the entire study. They determine who you recruit, what method you choose to use, what tasks you design, and even how you analyze the data later. And if those questions are fuzzy, then everything downstream suffers. Once the questions are clear, choosing a method is actually very straightforward. This is where people usually ask, should I do user interviews? Should I run usability testing? Should I send out surveys? And my answer is always the same. Go back to your research questions. What are you trying to learn? If I want to understand mental models, if I want to understand user expectations, if I want to understand past experiences, I lean towards user interviews. And sometimes CAD sorts or other exploratory methods that help you understand how people think. If I want to understand behavior, you want to see where people click, you want to see where people hesitate, you want to see where they get stuck, then I use usability testing. And sometimes maybe contextual inquiry if I need to see how this behavior shows up in their real environment. If I want to see patterns at scale, that's when I think of surveys. So generally, think of methods as tools. They don't make you a researcher. Your reasoning actually does. The way you think through the problem actually is what makes you a researcher. So once we have chosen the method or methods, then the real planning work begins. From my experience, this is where a lot of beginners freeze. And if I'm being honest, the reaction is valid. Now you have to write the questions, you have to design the task, and then you have to determine in what order things should happen in. I usually capture my discussion questions in a simple working document so that I can keep refining as the study takes shape. So I'll walk you through how I usually approach a discussion guide. First, I take a look at my research questions. Remember the research questions that we identified earlier? Yes, so I take a look at my research questions and then start breaking things down into smaller questions that can help me drive the conversations with the users. Now, every question in my discussion guide must serve a research question. So I have to be able to tie back a discussion question to a research question. If I'm not able to trace back a discussion question to the research question, then it has no business being in my discussion question. When I've written out the discussion questions in the discussion guide, then I begin to structure it into sections. First, we have the warm-up and context section, which is where I ask a few questions to help people settle in and also help me get a sense of who they are and their background. And then we have the core tasks or topics. This is the main part of the session. This is where we explore the experience or workflow or whatever it is we are trying to understand in this study. And then we have the reflection and wrap up. This is where I kind of have them step back and tell me what stood out to them, what felt confusing, or even what they expected, or if there's anything that I haven't asked them during the session that they'd like to share with me. That's the point where they share with me. So no matter the method, whether user interviews, whether usability testing, whether other exploratory methods, I structure the conversation the same way. I start with the easy, non-threatening questions that people can answer without feeling judged. And then I move into the actual tasks or scenarios or actual task questions and ask things like, walk me through what you would do here, or walk me through your most recent experiment. I also make sure to add probes to my discussion questions to help me dig deeper when I need to. I make sure to keep asking why. I ask why. I ask what they had expected. I ask things like, what would you do next? And I make sure to keep the guide very flexible. It's a guide for a reason. I make sure to keep it very flexible so that when somebody says something interesting, I can easily follow it. So I'm not very rigid with my guide. So the guide keeps me oriented. It doesn't necessarily control the conversation. And once the discussion guide is ready, the next step is to find the right people to talk to. Recruitment isn't the most exciting part of the job, but it matters a great deal. First, you need to define who you actually need to talk to. Would it be first-time users, new users, or would it be experienced users? Would it be users who use the product every week? Would it be users who have tried and have failed? You want to think very carefully about the attributes of the people that you need to talk to. When you have determined the kind of people you need to talk to, then you need to work with whatever recruitment options are available to you. Would that be maybe user feedback panels that you have within your organization? Would that be customer lists? Would that be partner teams? Maybe even sometimes direct outreach to people. After that, I design and review the screener carefully. You know those short questionnaires that we use to select participants just to make sure that we are selecting and we're talking to the right people. And we are being this careful about selecting the right people because talking to the wrong people would derail your study even faster than any bad question would. And then we go into the main session. This is where the real conversation begins. When the session starts, the first few minutes are about gaining trust. You need to gain the trust of your participants. At this point, I explain why we are here, why we are having the session. I let them know that we are testing the product and not them, so they're a little more relaxed. And I also let them know that there are no right answers. There are no right or wrong answers. And then I listen. My job is to listen and observe. I ask the question and then I listen and observe. Depending on the study, I might ask them to walk me through how they usually do something, or I might ask them to react to an experience, or maybe try out a task while thinking out loud. So I'm asking them open questions. I'm using my discussion guide to guide the conversation. I'm watching what they do. I'm listening to them explain their thinking. I'm paying attention to what they say. But not just that, I'm observing, I'm watching out for what they hesitate on, what they skip, or maybe even what they come back to. Sometimes I ask follow-up questions like, what were you expecting there? Or maybe when they select something, I ask, oh, what made you choose that? And other times I'm just observing. I just sit there, stay quiet, and let them move through it at their own pace. Not jumping in, not correcting. I just let them move through it at their own pace. And one thing I would say is during these conversations, I've learned to be quite comfortable with silence. I don't try to fill in every pause. Sometimes when you give people a little more time, they end up saying something very important. I must let you know that people ramble, people contradict themselves, people struggle to explain their thinking, and that is not noise. That is actually data. My job as a researcher isn't to correct or to guide them. My job is to understand how they make sense of what is in front of them or what I'm asking them. And I must also warn you that most times after all of these sessions, things feel messier than expected. This is the part that nobody prepares you for. You now have notes, you have recordings, you have transcripts, you have screenshots, you have all of that. And no clear answer yet. That is absolutely normal. And then comes the part where I start to make sense of everything. And this is where analysis begins. After the sessions, I usually have a lot in front of me. I have notes, I have transcripts, recordings, screenshots, and at first, all that can feel like a lot to sort through. It usually feels like a lot to sort through. So I start simple. I go back to the sessions, I reread the notes, I go through the transcript, I revisit moments where people gave me reactions, maybe where they hesitated or where they paused or where they sounded unsure or maybe where they were excited. Sometimes I'm highlighting things in the transcript, other times I'm writing things down in my notes. I'm just starting to notice what keeps coming up. At first, it may feel like everything matters. And then slowly, some things start showing up again and again. And that's when analysis really begins. Analysis is not magic. It's actually structured attention. So what I do here is I group similar observations together. I look for patterns across sessions. Maybe several people struggled at the same step, at a particular step. Maybe a few people had the same expectation that didn't match what the product did. Maybe people used the same workaround in different ways. Slowly, those kind of patterns begin to show up. And so I begin to ask myself questions like, what's consistent across people? What keeps causing friction? What surprised me? What did people expect that didn't happen? Like, what expectations did people have that the product didn't meet? Note that an insight isn't something one person said. That's not an insight. It's something that keeps showing up, even if several people describe it in different ways. For example, one person might say, oh, I wasn't sure what to do here. At that same point, somebody else might pause and over for a while. And maybe another person at that point, instead of pausing, they try to walk around. Now, this might look like different moments, but they are pointing to the same underlying issue. Something at that step is not clear. Something isn't clear at that step. And every insight has to answer one question. So what? So what does this change for the product? So what does the team need to understand differently now? So what decision does this inform? If it doesn't inform a decision, then it's not an insight yet. And so you repeat all of this until you get your insights and your insights are clear. Once the analysis is done and the insights are clear, the final step is to communicate them. And this is the point where I start to bring the story together to share with the team. Now I'm taking everything I've seen across sessions, the patterns, the moment of understanding, the moment of confusion, the workarounds, everything I've seen across the sessions. I'm turning all of that into something that the team can understand and they can act on. And I usually pull the key points into a few clear slides, enough to explain what we did, what we learned, why it matters, and what that might mean for the product, or what we might do next, or the recommendations coming out of it. This is where research either lands or gets ignored. You don't just present data, You explain what is happening. I connect what people are trying to do, where they're struggling or where they're getting stuck, to why it matters to the product. What is important to note is that in those moments, I'm just not showing clips or showing numbers. I'm walking the team through what we actually observed. Things like what people expected, what surprised them, where they slowed down, or maybe even where they were quite unsure. What I'm doing here is not just to dump data on them, but to help them see the experience through the user's eyes. For instance, instead of saying something like 3 out of 5 users could not complete the setup, I might say something like people are trying to get started quickly, but they're getting stuck at the setup phase because the language assumes that they understand the system already. And now everyone can see and understand what is happening, that this is not a usability issue. This is a clarity problem. The problem is clearer to everybody. And that usually leads to a conversation or to conversations. For instance, designers start to think about what could be simplified. And maybe the product team is thinking, oh, what needs to change? And that's the point where you know that your research is resonating, that it's making sense to the team. When the insights start to drive real conversations, when they inform actual decisions, and the work doesn't just end at presentation. It doesn't end at just being shared and then everybody forgets about it. Also, it might be helpful to note that the goal is not to share everything that you learned. That might be really cumbersome. The goal is to make the problem clear enough that the team knows what to do next. Good research storytelling is about clarity, not about volume. It's about helping the team see the problem the way the users experienced it. And that's the UX research process, end to end. Like I said in the beginning, it usually starts with confusion. And then you talk to stakeholders to figure out what the actual question is or what the actual questions are. You design the study, you talk to real people, and you sit with the data that you have collected. And then you analyze the data, start noticing the patterns. And by the time you get your clear insights, you help the team understand what exactly is really happening. You share back the story to the team. So you see that if you zoom out, UX research is not a straight or a linear process. It's iterative. It's sometimes uncomfortable. It's often uncertain. When you see the process laid out step by step, it can feel structured. But when you are in it, it's a lot of thinking, listening, and figuring things out as you go. And so at its core, that's really the UX research process. It's helping the team, your team, understand the people or understand the users a little better so that they can actually make better decisions. And that's what UX research actually looks like in practice. And if this video helped you understand UX research process just a little better, I'd appreciate if you subscribe to this channel. It genuinely helps keep me making more videos like this. And if you found it useful, go ahead and like the video. It helps more people who are trying to learn UX find it. You can also turn on your notification bell so you know when I post new videos on this channel. And to my returning subscribers, thank you. I don't take your support for granted. I'm truly glad that you're here. And if this video sparked any question for you, feel free to drop in the comments. I'll make sure to respond to them. And I'd love to hear from you. What would you want me to talk about next? Drop in the comments. And if you're seeing me for the first time, hi, my name is Tobi Lasisi, and I'm a user experience researcher. I currently work in the quantum computing application domain. And on this channel, I talk everything UX research, from starting out to career advancement and everything in between. So if that's something that you are interested in, please make sure to stick around. We'd love you to join the community. All right, I'll see you in my next video. Bye.